Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. As of the date of upload, Dimension Force officially releases to the public. It's got some incredible new themes like Scareclaw and Therian, and support for Heroics, Symphonics, and many more, one of which being a rather infamous archetype. While a pure version of the deck hasn't really made a name for itself at the top tables, a number of its component cards certainly have, and with this new wave of support, they're looking to take another crack at high-ranked glory. Premiering in the November 2016 core set Invasion Vengeance, Predaplants are a theme piloted by... spoilers ahead for Arc V, so if you're looking to go in fresh, now's your time to skedaddle. Predaplants are a theme piloted by Yuri, one of Yuya Sakaki's alternate dimension alter egos, as well as a reincarnation of the Supreme King Zark. They've delighted plant deck pilots the world over with their unique fusion tools, as well as implementing their signature predator counters for some odd yet brutal play sequences, sadistically picking apart the opponent's board and abilities, much like their depraved duelist of origin. So, let's venture into the jungles to see what feral flora we can find, observe their hunting habits, then see if there are any carnivorous companions that are worthy enough of joining this pack of vicious vegetation. It's time to pursue victory with Predaplants. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and there's no better way to get there than on our duel runners. Our next stop is 30k, where we'll have Jack Atlas Explained, which includes Resonators, Red Dragon Archfiend, and whatever other cards were used by the Master of Foster. We've also got our Discord, where I am just so sad we lost Meow Meow Mew. I'm also on Twitch, where you can join me for viewer duels and progression pools, and don't forget about my Patreon, where you can gain access to my videos early, reach some of these milestones, as well as helping to determine which explained videos I make. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with Predaplants? Well, they're a series of dark attribute plant-type monsters that are based on carnivorous plants of various kinds, with a penchant for fusion summoning. But if they're not looking to put more purple cards onto the board, they're looking to spread and utilize the power of predator counters. In fact, they're so prevalent that we'll want to go over what in the heck they do. Basically, a monster with a predator counter that has levels becomes level 1 if they're level 2 or higher. Now, as with all counters, this isn't some kind of inherent effect of predator counters. Rather, it's an adjoining effect of whatever places those counters, because that's just how they're all worded. But unlike the A counters of aliens, which require you to control an alien that has that specific attack reduction effect for the debuff to apply, the level change is a lingering effect that will continue to apply even if no other cards that involve predator counters are on the field. I'm sure there's some kind of corner case in which this matters. Maybe there's some kind of counter moving effect I'm unaware of that would cause a monster to have predator counters, but not have their level changed. But in general, this doesn't really change how the counters work, because it does state that if they lose the predator counter, their levels will go back to normal. But since people tend to come watch these videos after an archetype gets some kind of update in the future, I figure I should lead with this as a way of future-proofing it. Also, it might help deter people from being pedantic about Predaplants in the comment. A fool's errand, I know, but I can't deny my nature. For sorting reasons, let's go over these in level order, and because of that, we'll be starting with one of our newest monsters, Predaplant Buffalicula, a level 1 pendulum monster with 0 attack and defense with a scale of 0, very strong. As a pendulum card, during your main phase, you can fusion summon a dark fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. And as a monster, if this card is sent to the grave or added to your face-up extra deck because it was used as fusion material, you can add a face-up dark pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, except a copy of itself. It's nice to have what amounts to a polymerization on a monster for your fusion theme, and being able to recycle cards is the hallmark of a good fusion material monster. And since it's a scale 0, you'll actually be able to pendulum summon Buffalicula back to keep using that effect, which I'm a big fan of. I love burying my opponent in so much advantage that they croak. And while we're on the subject of pendulums, let's also cover their complementary scale, Predaplant Spider Orchid, a level 1 pendulum monster with 0 attack and defense with a scale of 8. As a pendulum spell, during your main phase, if this card was activated this turn, you can target one other face-up card in the spell and trap zone and destroy it. And as a monster, during the end phase, if this card was normal or special summoned this turn, you can discard a plant monster to add a level 4 or lower plant monster from your deck to your hand. Not my favorite kind of searcher, waiting until the end phase is pretty rough, but being able to search plants in general means we can get off-theme support like Lonefire Blossom. We also have our own back row that we'd like to destroy, but we can also knock out things like our own floodgates when they've outlived their welcome, or our opponent's cards if they have any valid targets. Never mind looking for the right line of play, you've got a whole web to consider here. Predaplant Biblisp is a level 1 monster with 0 attack and 1900 defense, and if this card is sent to the grave, you can add a Predaplant monster from your deck to your hand. And if a monster with a predator counter is on the field, you can special summon this card from your grave, but banish it when it leaves the field. This unfortunately means you won't get to double dip on the search, but they can always be used as extra fusion material, or for whatever other kind of summon they can fit with. So this card is a lot more than a Bliplisp on your opponent's radar. Predaplant Cordyceps is a level 1 monster with 0 attack and defense, and during your standby phase, you can banish this card from your grave, then target 2 level 4 or lower Predaplant monsters in your grave and special summon them. Also, for the rest of the turn, you can't special summon except a fusion summon, nor can you normal summon or set any monsters. This one's a tough recommendation, not gonna lie. With so much of the game revolving around the number of monsters you can output, limiting yourself to only a single, very specific kind of summon for a whole turn means it has to be a very powerful fusion summon. And while we have some strong ones, I don't think any are worth the cost of an entire turn's worth of setup. The only way I could see this being a justified inclusion is as a one-of that you can throw into the grave early and keep around for a rainy day to put monsters on board to prevent some direct attacks, or just as a way to have a play when you otherwise wouldn't have one. And for what it's worth, the summoned monsters do get their effects. Still, it's a widely underpowered card, which is surprising to me since it's easily the most terrifying of the creatures we've seen thus far. These things mind control ants and make them food for bigger creatures so they can spread. I'm getting existential crisis just thinking about them. Predaplant Saraceni Ant is a level 1 monster with 100 attack and 600 defense, and when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can special summon this card from your hand. And after damage calculation, if this card battled an opponent's monster, you can destroy that opponent's monster. And if this card is destroyed by battle, or this card on the field is sent to the grave by a card effect, you can add a Predap card from your deck to your hand. The search condition is worded like this so you can also search your spells and traps, which have the Predap prefix, but are otherwise cute little portmanteaus. Having a free blocker that pops out of your hand to defend you is pretty neat, especially because if your opponent continues to attack it after the replay, they're gonna trade while getting you a search. And even if that doesn't happen, if you use them as fusion material after that point, you still get the search. So with proper play, nothing can stop you from getting up to your silly antics. Predaplant Chlamydo Sundew is a level 2 monster with 600 attack and 200 defense, and while on the field, monsters with predator counters on them that you use as fusion material are treated as dark. And during the main phase, you can fusion summon a dark fusion monster from your extra deck using this card on the field and monsters from your hand, field, and or monsters with predator counters your opponent controls as fusion material. Hello Proto-Albaz, it's good to see ya. Yes, we've now introduced another function of predator counters, making monsters potential fusion material for Chlamydo Sundew. It even makes them dark, which is super helpful for keeping the material in line with what we need. It's a shame that the little plant gecko can't place predator counters themselves, so you'll have to pray you draw some help for that. Predaplant Flytrap is a level 2 monster with 400 attack and 800 defense, and once per turn you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and place a predator counter on it. And at the start of the damage step, when this card battles a monster with equal or lower level to it, you can destroy that monster, then increase this card's level by the original level of the destroyed monster. So if you ping a sufficiently large monster with the initial effect, like a level 8, Flytrap can run over it, destroy it because of the predator counter level reduction, and now it's level 10. You don't even have to worry about passing out predator counters to ensure the effect triggers, cause at that point you're only afraid of level 11s and 12s, as well as every Season Link monster since I guess they're too cool for levels or something. Predaplant Squid Dracera is a level 2 monster with 800 attack and 400 defense, and you can send this card from your hand to the grave, then target a face-up monster you control, and this turn it can attack all monsters your opponent controls with predator counters on them once each. And if this face-up card leaves the field, you can place a predator counter on each special summoned monster your opponent controls. This card has never been easier to trigger since the advent of Link monsters, namely Almirage, as you can normal summon Dracera, link it off, and now your opponent's entire board has been predatored. If Drosera is in your hand, you can then make one of your monsters a Susanoo, attacking a whole bunch, but I'd rather be using them for stuff like fusion material than as punching bags. Remember, you gotta be smart about how you play your Squid Drosera games. Predaplant O for Scorpio is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack and 800 defense, and when it's normal or special summoned, you can send a monster from your hand to the grave to special summon a Predaplant monster from your deck. Now, this can summon any of our Predaplants, but it's hard to talk about Scorpio without bringing up their partner in crime, Predaplant Darlingtonia Cobra. Another level 3 monster with 1000 attack and 1500 defense. And if this card is special summoned by the effect of a Predaplant monster, you can add a polymerization spell card or a fusion spell card from your deck to your hand. So, at the cost of any monster in your hand, Scorpio replaces it with another monster that then gets you a search from a pool of the most powerful cards in the game, with no other restrictions applied. At the time, you'd see this splashed into a variety of decks that had nothing to do with Predaplants or fusion summoning because of how good some of these search targets could be. Brilliant Fusion used to be very popular before it was banned, but other options like Super Polymerization were very prevalent. They could then be folded into a rank 3 of your choice because they also had matching levels, and that was before links made it possible to turn those two into just about anything. And the Fusion pool has only gotten better since these cards were released, with Branded Fusion and Fusion Destiny setting a very high bar. Their drop-off in playability might sting a bit, but for the time, it's no wonder how they managed to snake their way into so many decks. Predaplant Terrapenthus is a level 3 monster with 300 attack and 2100 defense, and when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and place a predator counter on it. And once per turn, you can target a monster your opponent controls with a level less than or equal to this card and take control of it until the end phase. Ooh, that's a little scary. I think the way it was intended to be used was as kind of a hoplomous. You set it turn 1, your opponent runs into it with a smaller monster, and you punish them by putting a predator counter on them. Then on your turn, you snag it and use it however you please. But as predator counters get easier and easier to use, the more often you can just normal summon Terrapenthus and get the steal. Heck, that monster doesn't even have to have a predator counter on them, because our effect basically says that you can use it on any level 3 or lower monster, so any spare tiny virtual worlds are fair game. And, failing all that, it'll still have a nice career in baseball, because it looks like a pretty good pitcher plant. Predaplant Nepenthes is a level 4 monster with 1600 attack and 1000 defense, and gains 200 attack for each predator counter on the field. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can equip that monster to this card. And once per turn, you can target a monster card equipped to this card by this card's effect, destroy it, and if you do, gain life points equal to its original attack. That's a lot of extra words to effectively make this the Elemental Hero Steam Healer of the theme, though I'm sure any Arrow Mages that find their way into this list will be thankful. While this card does use Predator counters, there's a lot better stuff that we can do with them beyond acting like an A-Forces specifically for this fella. I can't really recommend this card, since so many others do more than Moray. Predaplant Spinodionea is a level 4 monster with 1800 attack and 0 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and place a predator counter on it. And after damage calculation, if this card battled a monster with an equal or lower level, you can special summon a Predaplant monster from your deck. The joys of having your own Flamvel Fire Dog on theme. Once again, the effect doesn't necessarily require a predator counter to be on that opponent's monster, just that it has to fight a monster with an equal or lower level, so usually 4 or lower. It also doesn't have to destroy the monster it battled, so if you keep running into a defense position monster with a higher defense, or that can't be destroyed by battle, you can keep getting value like you wouldn't believe. Heck, slap some kind of multi-attack on this, say with, oh, I don't know, Squid Drosera, and you're off to the races because there's no hard once per turn clause on this card. Predaplants aren't really known for letting their main deck monsters spearhead the offensive, but I don't think Spino knows what a spear even is, so they hardly care. Predaplant Drosophilum Hydra is a level 5 monster with 800 attack and 2300 defense, and you can special summon this card from your hand or grave by tributing a monster on either player's field with a predator counter on them, making them a kaiju that's always there to break up a board, but you can only special summon Drosophilum once per turn this way. If this card is on the field or in the grave as a quick effect, you can banish one other Predaplant monster from your grave, then target a face-up monster on the field, and it takes a permanent 500 attack debuff. And that's not nothing. While it's on the field, that means any monster with 2800 or less attack that can be affected by this won't be able to swing over this by battle after applying this effect. And its ability to tribute off a monster once a predator counter has stuck to it is a constant threat your opponent is going to have to respect, lest you gobble up some of their best monsters. Hey, does that make this the missing Biolante kaiju we never got? Predaplant Banksy Ogre is a level 6 tuner monster with 2000 attack and 100 defense, and you can special summon this card from your hand by tributing an opponent's monster with a predator counter on it. Neat, I love having more of these. And if this card is sent from the field to the grave, place a predator counter on each face-up monster your opponent controls. So while this lacks the graveyard synergy of Drosophilum, it does explode in a flurry of predator counters once it leaves the field, making your opponent's monsters vulnerable to all your Predaplant predator counter effects. Once again, barring the Xyz and Link monsters because they're beyond levels, I guess. It's also worth mentioning that this is a tuner as well, so I guess you can pair it with a level 4 to make a Barone or, heaven forbid, Hulk. And honestly, they couldn't have given it a better name, cause it looks like a Banksy piece. What in the world is going on with this thing? Predaplant Helium for Heintius is a level 8 monster with 1200 attack and 2400 defense, and if your opponent controls a monster with a predator counter, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if this card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target a Dark Dragon or Dark Plant monster in your grave and special summon it, except a copy of itself. Dark Dragon, you say? We'll come back to that in a bit. For now, this card is fine, I guess. Level 8s tend to work best in Xyz decks, which we don't have a huge focus on, especially at that rank. It can be used as fusion material, but its effect is only really relevant for that if you have a fusion effect that can only use material on board. Otherwise, you'll just be putting it up as a blocker and dare your opponent to get over it, dealing with all the consequences that entails. It could also just be confused about the theme it ended up in. It certainly looks like they mixed up some dino DNA in there. Predaplant Triantis is a level 8 monster with 2400 attack and 1000 defense, ooh, Monarch stats, and is our third Pendulum monster, sporting a scale of 8. While in the Pendulum scales, you can use cards in your Pendulum zones as material to fusion summon a Dark Fusion monster as if they were monsters on the field. And as a monster, if this card is used as material for a fusion summon and sent to the grave, or added to the extra deck face up, you can place a Predator counter on a number of monsters on the field up to the number you control, which can be your own. This combos very well with Buffalicula, who can themselves initiate a fusion summon. And if you use both of them, then you can add Triantis back to your hand to reset part of your scales. It's also very helpful in spreading predator counters, as you'll likely get at least one from the fusion you make, and you get an additional one for every other monster you control. Its level, combined with the fact that your natural top end scale is 8, means you won't be able to repeatedly summon Triantis over and over again, but they still make for strong fusion material to get your effects online. And if you ever want to splash in Tenacity of the Monarchs, you now have a great enabler for it. Alright, that's all of our main deck monsters, now it's time for the big payoffs in the extra deck. First, let's go over Predaplant Ambula Melodus, a level 5 monster with 1000 attack and 2500 defense, requiring any 2 Predaplant monsters as material. If this card is fusion summoned, you can add a Predaplant monster or a Predap Spell or Trap card from your deck, grave, or face-up extra deck to your hand. It can also target a monster your opponent controls with a Predator counter on it, or any monster you control, tribute it, and if you do, special summon a Predaplant monster from your deck. Its removal is no Drosophilum, but if worse comes to worse, Ambula Melodus can just search it. Otherwise, if it's regularly affected by this, it's non-destruction removal that can trade one of your opponent's monsters to summon a new one of your own. It can even be Darlingtonia Cobra, and we've already gone over how good that card is. We can get Chlamydo Sundew to fusion summon with your opponent's monsters, or Spinodionea to keep up the Predaplant parade. And none of this factors into the search you get, and trust me, we've got some wild spells and traps to search later on, so when Ambula Melodus hits the board, you're gonna have to call an ambulance for your opponent. Predaplant Chimera Fleecia is a level 7 monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense, requiring a Predaplant and any dark monster as material. Once per turn, you can target a monster on the field with a level less than or equal to this card's and banish it. And when an attack is declared involving this card and an opponent's face-up monster, you can activate this effect so that until the end of this turn, that opponent's monster loses 1000 attack, and if it does, this card gains 1000 attack. And once per turn, during the next standby phase after this card was sent to the grave, you can add a Polymerization spell card or Fusion spell card from your deck to your hand. Wowee, that's a mouthful, but it's all worth it. Against any monster that has levels, has a predator counter, and can be targeted, Chimera Felicia can just banish it. And it doesn't even need that counter against level 7 and lower monsters. It can profitably battle monsters as big as 4500 attack and gets you the Darlingtonia Cobra search if it's ever sent to the grave. Though it is a bit delayed here, so you won't get to slam down something like Fusion Destiny in immediate retaliation. And because of the material needed, along with their effect, this is easily made with Chlamydo Sundew, because it turns monsters with predator counters on them into darks for that fusion. So even if they're an Xyz or Link monster, it's not going to keep them safe when you put the pedal to the metal. Predaplant Dragostopelia is a level 8 monster with 2700 attack and 1900 defense, requiring a fusion monster and a dark monster as material. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and place a predator counter on it. And while Dragostopelia is on the field, the activated effects of your opponent's monsters with predator counters on them are negated. So on top of being another way to spread predator counters around, it's also quick effect negation, even affecting synchros and Xyz. It also means that any quick effect that can place predator counters can also act as a negation. And because this is a continuous effect, this can stop effects that are already on a chain, provided you can get the counter on them before it resolves. All of this is fantastic, and that's before we consider that its fusion material is outrageously good. Chlamydo Sundew can put a predator counter on any fusion monster to make this, Albaz can similarly pull this off without needing the counter, but the best way is by utilizing super polymerization. Despite the recent ban list, Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is still a threat you need to have an appropriate answer for, and thankfully, having a non-destruction way of removing them from the field they can't evade is pretty sweet. You can either use your own Predaplants, or if your opponent has another Dark, you can just scoop that up as well for a massive value play. If you aren't already seeing this at your local dueling field of choice, you better believe that it's out there now that Branded have made fusions the new hotness. You could say it's a Dragostapelia. What's possibly even more vicious is Predaplant Trifio-Veritum, a level 9 monster with 3000 attack and defense, requiring any 3 dark monsters on the field. It gains attack equal to the total original attack of all other monsters on the field with predator counters, making it a really terrifying multi-honest. When your opponent special summons any number of monsters from the extra deck while you control this fusion summoned card as a quick effect, you can negate that summon, and if you do, destroy those monsters, making this an effective counter to Synchro, Xyz, Link, and Pendulum summons, as well as any other inherent summon they can whip up. And if your opponent controls any number of monsters with predator counters on them, you can special summon this card from your grave in defense position. This takes away the negation, and while it does retain the attack gain, summoning it in defense position means you'll have to wait a turn, but that's not the worst considering its monumental defensive stat. While the material having to be on the field is a bit of a downer, A, Triantis helps get you more material quickly, and B, this just means you can punish Dark Pilots even more with super polymerization. Trust me, they're gonna have a harder time getting over this setup as they will trying to pronounce Trifio-Veritum. Now, that covers all the fusion plant monsters, but as a fragment of Zark, Yuri has a whole other subset of fusions that are part of the Dimensional Dragons line. They're all still dark, but are now dragons instead of plants. Let's start with the version that others will build upon, Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, a level 8 monster with 2800 attack and 2000 defense, requiring any 2 dark monsters on the field as material, except tokens. If this card is fusion summoned, you can make this card gain attack equal to one of your opponent's special summoned monsters until the end of this turn. And once per turn, you can target a level 5 or higher monster your opponent controls, and until the end phase, this card's name becomes that monster's original name, and replace this effect with that monster's original effects. And if this fusion summoned card is destroyed, you can destroy all of your opponent's special summoned monsters. This card is the physical embodiment of, if I can't have it, no one can. Starving Venom will take your attack, it'll take your effect, it's even another really good super poly payoff for stealing monsters as material. And if your opponent has anything to say about it, Starving Venom will just wipe the board of special summoned monsters, forcing them to rebuild all over again. Jeez, talk about toxic behavior. When closer to the power of Zark, we get Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom, a level 8 monster with 2800 attack and 2000 defense that requires 2 Dark Pendulum monsters as material that must be fusion summoned, or a special summon from the extra deck by tributing the above monsters you control, kinda like Contact Fusion. Once per turn, you can target another monster on the field or in the grave, and until the end phase, this card's name becomes that monster's original name, and replace this effect with that monster's original effect. Also, it'll deal piercing battle damage. And, while it may not look like much on the surface, that's why this card is banned in the TCG. See, by getting Lyrilisk Independent Nightingale into rotation, Instant Fusion being a good starting point, you can have Supreme King Starving Venom copy it, burn your opponent for 4,000 damage, and then you'd have a 6,800 attack Piercer. So, assuming the only damage you've done so far is the 4,000 from Starving Venom and 500 from Nightingale, your opponent's going to have no monsters on board with an available attack or defense of 2,800 or less to survive even one attack, all wrapped up in a monster that has virtually zero opportunity cost to pull off in Pendulum Magicians. Not to mention it can see play in any number of Dark Pendulum decks. So, to make sure it didn't find any other similarly busted combinations, they just banned the darn thing, and good riddance for it. I shudder to think what would happen if this card gained access to all the Albaz fusion monster effects that you'd be dumping off of Mirror Jade. Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon is a level 10 monster with 3,300 attack and 2,500 defense, requiring any Predaplant monster, as well as any dark monster whose original level is 8 or higher. Oh hey DPE, good to see you again. This card must first be fusion summoned, and once per turn, you can target a face-up monster on the field, and until the end of the turn, change that target's attack to 0, also that target has its effects negated. If this card is destroyed and sent to the grave, you destroy as many monsters on the field as possible, then you can banish a level 8 or higher dark monster from your grave and special summon this card. And wow, guess what? There's no once per turn on that. Though that's likely not much of an issue, you're probably only going to be doing that a single time before you run out of grave material. Wait. Is that why they printed Helium Pharyncheus? So that you had a level 8 dark monster that's not a Starving Venom monster to feed to that effect? I mean, that doesn't make it good, but it does bring me some closure. Regardless, it still gets the board nuke and can smother a monster each turn, making it very easy to swing over and making sure it's not a threat, provided it's not something that can be activated before you do that. It's not really in the same power tier as Supreme King Starving Venom, but that's just what happens when you get greedy. A new fusion coming out this set is Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon, a level 10 monster with 3,600 attack and 2,500 defense, requiring a dark fusion monster and any other fusion monster as material, and is always treated as a Predaplant card. Once per turn, when a card or effect is activated, you contribute a monster on either field with a predator counter on it, and if you do, negate the activation. It doesn't destroy, but when you're attributing an opponent's monster as cost, I'm a bit more forgiving. If this fusion summoned card you control is sent to the grave by an opponent's card, you can target a dark monster in your grave and special summon it. Not gonna lie, this card's a bit of a letdown. While attributing your opponent's monsters to negate activations is pretty stellar, you need to make sure they have those counters on them before you start building that chain. You can't stop halfway through like magic to finally get the negation on the chain. But this means it's highly telegraphed, so your opponent can just link away or otherwise get rid of the monster before they commit to anything. Heck, if they end up tributing the counter-laden monster as cost for an effect you want to activate, then they aren't going to be around anymore to help with that negate. Triantis can actually help a bit, as it can put predator counters on your own cards, but then we're trading a monster for non-destruction negation, which I'm still not a fan of. Now, it can revive itself once with its floating effect, helping to keep it around to negate more things, but for now, it's really just another potential super poly target that lacks the Predapower to be anything but Predapasse. Next up, we have some Pendulum Fusions, starting with Odd Eyes Venom Dragon, a level 10 monster with 3,300 attack and 2,500 defense with a scale of 1, requiring a Starving Venom monster and an Odd Eyes monster as material that must be fusion summoned and can afterwards be pendulum summoned. As a pendulum spell, once per turn, you can target a fusion monster you control, and it gains 1,000 attack for each monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn. And as a monster, once per turn, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, and until the end phase, this card gains attack equal to its attack, and if it does, this card's name becomes that monster's original name, and replace this effect with that monster's original effects. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can special summon a monster from your pendulum zone, and if you do, place this card in your pendulum zone. Wow, this is a lot of work for not a lot of payoff. Sure, you get to honest an opponent's monster while getting to do what it does, but if it's not an effect you care about, then what's the point? Even its scale is outdated now that Buffalicula gives you a 0 scale. I can't even say its name is appropriate, because it's not doing anything odd. We've been seeing this from Starving Venom monsters this whole video. But we're not done yet, because now we have to talk about the manga pendulums. Starving Venomy Dragon is a level 7 monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense, requiring a dark monster and a pendulum monster as material. As a pendulum spell, each time any number of cards are sent from the field to the grave, place a Venomy counter on this card for each card sent. And all monsters on the field, except dark dragons, lose 200 attack for each Venomy counter on the field. And once per turn, you can reduce the battle damage you would take to 0. As a monster, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, and until the end phase, this card's name becomes that monster's original name, and you replace this effect with that monster's original effects. Then, that monster loses 500 attack and defense, its effects are negated, also inflict 500 damage to your opponent. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place this card in the pendulum zone. So we have another way to steal effects, and it even negates the effects of the monster we steal it from. But instead of wiping out their attack, we just take a bit of it away while dealing some burn damage. Not the worst thing imaginable, especially because being a level 7 monster means it gets under our scale 8s to be a repeatable summon. But the pendulum effect unfortunately reminds me too much of Venom's, so I want to be talking about this card as little as possible. Unfortunately, I'll have to stick with it a little longer because they have an evolved form. Starving Venomy Lethal Dose Dragon, a level 8 monster with 2800 attack and 2000 defense with a scale of 1, requiring 3 dark pendulum monsters as material. As a pendulum spell, once per turn during your main phase, you can place a Venomy counter on each face-up monster your opponent controls. And all monsters on the field except dark dragons lose 200 attack for each Venomy counter on the field, and yes, this does stack with base Venomy. As a monster, it has base Venomy's pendulum effect, gaining Venomy counters each time any number of cards are sent from the field to the grave for each card sent, and debuffing all non-dark dragons attack by 200 for each Venomy counter on the field. And once per turn during your main phase, you can negate the effect of all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls until the end phase. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can place this card in the pendulum zone. So instead of stealing a single effect, it just says no to all of your opponents. But that means you'd have to fusion summon using 3 dark pendulums, which is doable, but once again, a lot of setup for not a lot of payoff. So it's largely going to get a pass, especially because it actively works against your Predaplants, debuffing them along with everything else. What'd they ever do to you, huh? I thought y'all were supposed to be buddies. Now, that's all the fusion monsters in our extra deck, but don't think I've gone and forgotten the most important one. Of all the Predaplant monsters that have seen play outside of its own theme, this next one has seen it all. Any deck that wants to dominate the playing field by leveraging a powerful fusion spell has this card in the extra deck. It's warped whole formats around it, and is the conduit of many unfortunate board states ever since its release. I am of course referring to the one, the only, Predaplant Verte Anaconda, a Link 2 monster with 500 attack, requiring any 2 effect monsters as material. It doesn't ask that they have different names, it doesn't ask for anything that might identify you as playing a Predaplant deck, you just need 2 effect monsters, which by my understanding is the most commonly used kind of monster in the game. It can target a face-up monster on the field and it becomes a dark monster until the end of the turn, but its more important effect has you paying 2,000 life points and sending a fusion or polymerization normal or quick play spell from your deck to the grave to have this effect become the effect of the sent spell when it's activated. Also, you can't special summon monsters for the rest of the turn after using this effect. Now, giving this the most generous read I possibly could, Verte was likely printed as a way to give decks like Predaplants and Frightfurs, decks with great fusion spells but that really need to resolve them, a way to essentially have their fusion spells ready for them in the extra deck. But because it lets you use any normal or quick play polymerization, or more importantly, fusion spell, this got out of hand very, very quickly. Now you didn't even have to have the material monsters on hand. You could pull the spell and the monsters right out of the deck, and as long as you performed this as the last thing in your turn, it wouldn't get in the way of any of your other plays. It even allowed you to do some janky things like use Red Eye's fusion after having summoned other monsters, because when Verte copies effects, it doesn't copy costs or conditions. This card is currently banned in the OCG, and while I hate to see another casualty in the long line of rogue deck gets incredibly playable card subsequently banned for being used in a meta deck occurrences, I expect the TCG will follow soon. So, when that time comes, goodbye Verte Anaconda, we'll always have the King Scarlet song to remember you by. Hi, Future Nova here. Just wanted to pop in here and let you all know that I wrote this video on Monday. And the ban list came out Tuesday. So, yeah, this is, kind of funny. Just imagine all of this is still technically true for, like, Master Duel. So, yeah. See y'all later. Alright, that's all the extra deck monsters, and now it's time for the spells and traps. Predapractice is a normal spell that special summons a Predaplant monster from your hand, then adds a Predap card from your deck to your hand, except another copy of itself. Also, for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck, except fusion monsters, which isn't really an issue considering branded decks are doing that all the time. This is a phenomenal starter because not only does it mobilize a Predaplant out of your hand without needing your normal summon, it replaces itself with any of your on-theme cards, spell, trap, or monster. Heck, it's a guaranteed way to get O for Scorpio on board with the monster in hand needed for the discard. And by the monster needed, I of course mean you search Biblisp, because then you get another search. It's like they say, Predapractice makes Preda perfect. Predaplants is a quick play spell that has you revealing any number of Predap cards in your hand, then target that number of face-up monsters your opponent controls, and places a Predator counter on each one. Also, if your Predaplant monster would be destroyed by a battle, you can banish this card from your grave instead. The natural -1 of this card is balanced out by how useful any given Predator counter can be. Even if you're not debuffing levels, you can still use that monster as fusion material via Clemido Sundew, or negating their effects with Dragostapelia, which is pretty useful since Predaplast is a quick play spell, acting as sort of a second activation for Drago. But regardless, I want to give whatever's going on in this card art a wide berth, because they do not look like they're having a blast. Predaprime Fusion is a quick play spell that you can activate if any number of Predaplant monsters are on the field, and you can fusion summon a Dark Fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from either field as material, including 2 or more Dark monsters you control. This is, I suppose, a more balanced version of Super Polymerization. The issue is that by requiring you to provide a minimum of 2 monsters to start using your opponents, we've already stopped being able to steal for most summons. There might be some esoteric ones where you can field a Predaplant to activate this card, but you use a bunch of unrelated material, but for our purposes, it's only going to let us steal a single monster for the summon of, like, Trifio Veritum. Maybe even Lethal Dose Dragon. But if we stop thinking about it as a bad Super Polymerization, and instead start thinking about it as a bad El Shaddoll Fusion, things start getting a little better. While you're not able to use in-hand material, you're still able to use your monsters on field to fusion summon at quick effect speed during the battle phase, and the summon can be in attack position. So if you swing in with a bunch of monsters and need a little more help closing out the game, you can make Starving Venom or any number of their forms depending on what you need. It may not be prime, but since it is searchable, I still think it's worth your time. Predaponics is a continuous spell, and with it, once per turn, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Predaplant monster from your hand or grave, but its effects are negated even if this card leaves the field. And once per turn, during your standby phase, you pay 800 life points or destroy this card. This is actually pretty neat. It's just a revival spell for free on the first turn, and if you need to keep it around, 800 is a pretty fair price for another revival. While their effects are negated, sometimes you just need another body for extra deck summons. And while the field effect is negated, you can still benefit from the grave effects of Biblisp and Squid Drosera. Honestly though, even if it didn't have those effects, I'd still be hard pressed to doubt the power and ingenuity of an Arboreum that can grow plants with those tiny little grabby hands. Predapruning is an equip spell that targets a Predaplant monster in your grave and special summons it, equipping it with this card. And when this card leaves the field, destroy that monster. Hey, I thought Premature Burial was banned. While lacking the repeatability of Ponix, Pruning can summon a monster of any level, so our fusions are fair game, and they get to keep their effects. Since this lacks any other once per turn clause, this is an easy include, but I hate to second guess things here, and I could be missing something, but I don't see any prunes in this art. I think we need more prunes. Predaplanting is a normal trap card that sends a Predaplant monster from your deck to the grave to place a predator counter on each face-up monster on the field, which not only enables your effects, can trigger Biblisp for a search. And while in the grave, if you fusion summon a dark monster, except during the damage step, you can banish this card from your grave, then target a card on the field and destroy it. While it was a fairly good card for spreading predator counters on release, it lacked a certain level of oomph that it now has thanks to Dimension Force support. Now it's not a -1 that has potential grave setup, it actually searches you a card. And bonus, since predator counters will be on every monster on the field, you can special summon the Biblisp you yarded. Perfect material for the fusion summons that will now have a destruction effect tacked on thanks to this here trap card. Now, I'm not sure what kind of planning is going on here. It looks much more like the savage destruction of the surrounding area, but maybe it's like urban planning? And they're gonna make a sweet plant shopping mall or something? Predaplant is a continuous trap, and if a monster with a predator counter leaves the field while this card is face up on the field, you can add a Predap card from your deck to your hand. You can also banish this card from your grave to fusion summon any fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as material, but only Predaplant monsters can be used as fusion material for a fusion summon using this effect. Now, in general, this is an effective way of gaining value from removing your opponent's monsters once they have counters on them, but Planet does not specify who has to control the monster that left the field, giving a little extra utility to the effects that put counters on your own monsters. And if it gets sent to the grave, then you can drop a surprise fusion on your opponent. But I gotta say, it's super jarring going from the art of Predaplanting to Planet. Like, these are vicious killing machines. Why does it look like they're all in some kind of comedy show right now? Okay, so that's all the Predaplant cards, but what do we do with them? Well, while we have some neat stun options in Dragostapelia and Trifio Veritum, we want to crush our opponent as soon as possible with battle damage. To that end, we need as many cards that will help us turbo out fusions, while also keeping our opponent's monsters in check. So what do we play to help them out? Well, all the general fusion stuff being played today is fair game, not least of which is branded fusion. We are a fusion deck, so we're not really concerned with being locked out of other summoning methods. That gets us access to Mirror Jade, as well as the removal, searching, and retaliation it can provide, as well as DPE for more targeted removal. Targeting in like a general sense. Speaking of fusion, instant fusion is a great way to start your game. You can use it to summon Ambula Melodis, get the Predap search, and then you can have it tribute itself to summon a Predaplant from your deck. And since instant fusion makes it a legit summon, you can later summon it back with Predapruning to get the monster summoning effect again. When it comes to monster type support, we've got some of the best in Lonefire Blossom. It can tribute itself to summon Scorpio and get that whole train going, but it can also summon any plant out of our deck in case we need the flexibility. Miracle Fertilizer is also an option here. While it's less powerful in a fusion deck than an Xyz deck like Sylvan's, which can bypass its self-destruction effect, it acts as another Predaponics that doesn't have a level restriction, nor does it negate the effect. Instead, it replaces your normal summon, but at some point you're gonna run out of those, and hey, if you want to run an Xyz or two to get some extra mileage out of Fertilizer, I ain't gonna stop you. You know how I was surprised that we had a premature burial? Well, the hits keep coming because we have a Snatch Steal as well. Use Mark of the Rose to take full advantage of your opponent's monster, then use it as either link or fusion material so you don't have to give it back. But despite our fusion focus, plants do have a few good links we can sneak in. Aromaseraphy Jasmine can tribute a plant they point to summon any other plant out of our deck, which is kinda neat, and Bangalancer is a compulsory evacuation device that we can revive using our spent Jasmines. Dark is one of the most widely supported attributes out there, so while Predaplants don't have an archetypal draw 2 spell, Allure of Darkness will work just dandy. As for a silly tech pick, I'd love to see what Propagandake can do. They're very weird, but can essentially turn every monster on the field into a plant, kinda like Zombie World does. And it prevents your opponent's plants they control from targeting your monsters, and they'll all be plants thanks to Propa's effect. It's super hilarious. And that's all I have to say about Predaplants. While many of their individual monsters have seen play every few formats, I'm confident that dedicated pilots are in a better position now than ever before. Fusion tools have had a huge upgrade, Dimension Force has provided not only more consistency, but power as well, so I can't wait to see them photosynthesize their way to a photo finish. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are Predaplants absolutely Predapoggers, or are they Predapathetic? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to show your support, ring that bell so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with someone you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander Ashling Waltz, Nebula Navigators 3rd Dynasty, Avagule, Adam Zajdel, Benjamin Meisner, Biohazard 011, Eric, Frankie, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Howling Zangetsu, Inblink, Ironic, John Manji, Julius Sneezer, Larakia, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Ruxith Sarani, Shooting Star 3300, The Fresh Prince of Con-Air, The Wizard Moose, Tyler Cranston and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders, Bear Sharktopus Studios, Chaz Ghost, Corbinisms, Cozy Boat 275, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Jesus Garcia, Manga Pages, Marion James E. Picata, Nitromo, RGS, Remti Bright, the Legendary Raven, and too much Desu, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. I'm only able to continue doing this thanks to the support of these lovely people, so if you'd like to be a part of these credits, as well as help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, please check out my YouTube membership or Patreon links in the description to see if I have anything you'd like on offer. And if you want to see another video about dark monsters that love Diffusion Summon, check out this video I did covering Tiara Laments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.